There's a framework out there that says that your life is shaped by 3 decisions: where you live, who you're with, and what you do. Most people, at least people I know or have known, they spend their entire lives renegotiating one or the other. And I, being an outside of the box kind of thinker, changed all 3 on the same day in my late 40s, and I moved to England. The United States that I grew up in had a very, very clear picture of what a good life looked like. Maybe you've heard of it. Many refer to it as the American dream, something kind of left over from the very prosperous eras after World War II. And that has been passed down from generation to generation. So most of us Americans or people who live in the United States have absorbed it. Without questioning it, we've just kind of taken it for granted that that is what it is. And that is the best way to live in the best country in the world, right? So basically it consists of a big house in the suburbs with the good schools. Everybody's got a reliable car. Everybody's got a good, decent job where they don't have to get their hands too dirty. You have a couple kids, you have the dog, you have the big backyard that you love to landscape on Saturdays, the career that you're very much grateful for, and a quiet hum of, hey, I think we made it. Here's the thing. I didn't just dream it. I was one of the lucky ones who was able to actually build it. I built a very cookie cutter version of the American dream. I had the house, I had the routine, I had a good promising job that had a decent salary. My partner was doing a job he pretty much loved and was bringing in enough money to help pay for medical care, basically. We had a child that was doing very well in one of the best school systems in the country. And we had the dog, we had the pool, we had everything. Technically, I had checked every single box on the American Dream checklist, but it wasn't enough. And I thought it was a personal flaw in me. Basically, in my mid to late 30s, I noticed something that I didn't really have a word for at the time. I wasn't unhappy and I wasn't in a crisis. I was comfortable, but comfortable in a way that kind of felt more like sedation. Like I was kind of numb, you know, that feeling that you get, that like food coma feeling you get when you have a really, really big, heavy meal where you just kind of want to zone out on a sofa for a couple hours and probably fall asleep. That was what my life felt like 90% of the time. So I've been living in England as an American for 3.5 years now. And I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between contentment and complacency. Because from the inside, I feel like they at least can feel very identical, very similar. Contentment is when the life that you're living matches the person who you are or want to be or who you're becoming, right? And it feels fulfilling and you feel excitement and exuberance about facing your day. Whereas complacency is more where it matches a person maybe you used to be or a version of your life that you thought you wanted that may not necessarily be applicable right now, but you've just kind of brushed that aside and kept going anyway. At the time, during this American dream phase of my life, I loved my house. I loved my dog. I was proud of my child. And, you know, I enjoyed swimming in the pool. Didn't enjoy the yard work, but that's a different story. But I realized I was more complacent than content. I didn't really realize it or understand it until I moved abroad because everything around me at the time was telling me that I was doing absolutely fine. I had all of the tangible evidence that I could possibly gather. The mortgage, school runs, the barbecues. In the United States, those aren't habits. Those are considered proof. That means you've made it. They're what a lot of people aspire to, what a lot of people want in their life. It's almost considered a character reference. Like if you've achieved that, then obviously you're a good person and you have drive and you have ambition. And that's how other people around you know you're okay. But was I really? I think a lot of people, especially I think people who will watch this video, kind of understanding what I'm getting at. You don't have to feel miserable all the time to feel like something's kind of off underneath the surface. You seem like you're perfectly okay and still know that deep down the environment that you're in isn't necessarily serving who you're supposed to be. It's not ingratitude and it's not that you're not appreciative of what you do have. It's just more like questioning the real reason you're striving for it in the first first place, and sort of a murky clarity, if that makes any sense, framework, the framework that I referenced earlier. So it's this thing that I read online that talks about determining where you live, who you're with, and what you do. Those are the three decisions that really ultimately shape your life. When I looked at those three questions honestly, truly honestly, I realized that I hadn't actually made any of them. Not consciously, not deliberately. I wanted to buy a house because I thought that that meant I would be settled. I wanted to make sure the child would get into a good school system in the United States because I know how difficult it is sometimes when you don't have a proper foundation to get you catapulted into success. So I thought that that would guarantee her a certain level of success. We got the dog because, we had an only child, and my partner worked a lot of late nights, protection and companionship. And my partner growing up in England never had a big yard and all of that. So having all of that was very important to him. And the career, I just followed a career path because I started working when I was 18 and basically didn't take my foot off the gas the entire time. So I just kept going because that's what you do till 65, 67, right? The United States had made, where I live basically my default. The social structures and everything I just described shaped the second, which is who I was with. And then the third, what I do, was what I was doing with my time, my energy, my actual days. All of that just kind of accumulated to a routine that became really sedimentary, especially when I started working from home, which I always wanted to, but I didn't really understand why I wanted to for a long time. The ultimate conclusion, though, when I started to analyze this a little bit, was that I hadn't actually chosen a lot of my life. I just followed a checklist and then landed in it. So I think it's more common than anyone wants to admit, especially in the United States, but I've seen it outside here in the UK as well. We celebrate people that hustle their way to success as a general norm. And it's not that that isn't something to be celebrated, but it's just that we often don't have a language of people who kind of wake up at 40 and ask, wait, was any of this mine? We assign something like a midlife crisis to it, but it really isn't. See, I moved to England in my 40s with my child, with a couple suitcases, and my entire life packed up in that, or most of my life packed up in that, and a partner who was just excited to go home. I made all of those decisions at once, seemingly overnight, but really, was it? When I think about it now, perhaps it was like a decade or so in the making. Now, I'm not going to romanticize this at all. There is a specific feeling that does come when the life that you built starts to become dismantled for a different life. The house starts to go quiet. You start to reevaluate everything you have in it. And the things that you are going through, whether or not you're going to bring them into your new life, and you try to figure out if it was something you really wanted to bring in the house or something that you compulsorily brought in, that you might have brought in based on a pretense that was programmed into you instead. When you think about the proof of your life in America, all of it, and then you have to decide whether you're going to keep, donate, sell, or discard. It doesn't actually feel like freedom at first. It actually feels more uncomfortable and more like you are in some sort of deprogramming. And the world starts feeling like you start to feel the tilt of the earth, basically. Sorry, I'm sounding very philosophical today, but I remember just standing in our house when it was almost emptied. I just remember thinking, what if I'm running away from something instead of trying to fix it? And honestly, that stays with me even to this day. Sometimes it creeps up on me in the back of my mind. But really, what you have to do is ask yourself a completely different question. I had to stop saying, what am I running from? And start thinking about what I was running towards. Because it wasn't really that I couldn't live in the United States anymore. It was that I was choosing not to for very good, specific reasons. When I got to England, something happened that I wasn't really expecting. I was slowly beginning to learn what life was like without scanning. It sounds very, very vague, but I guess let me just try to explain it. I have talked about this in videos before, but just in case you're new and you haven't seen any of those. In the United States, there's this kind of background noise, this little hum that is always around you. And it's not necessarily politically, although it's definitely part of it, especially lately. More like physiologically, your nervous system kind of is always on. You're always processing things like cost, threat, comparison, healthcare bills, school choices, the price of basic safety. And you kind of get used to doing that throughout your entire adult life that you don't even notice it until it starts to dissipate. And one day I'm standing in this village in the UK and I realized that a lot of that noise wasn't there anymore. It was gone enough that I was able to actually think clearly about every decision I was making here in the UK. And I started to think about maybe it was maybe the right choice to move abroad from the US and that, it's not really a luxury move. Like we don't live necessarily any better as far as materially here in the UK. Our house is smaller. We definitely don't have the pool, which is really sad for me because that was always a lifelong dream of mine. The school is hit or miss. I mean, it's a pretty good school system compared to the United States overall. I have my personal problems with it, but I digress. And we certainly don't make nearly as much money as we did when we lived in the United States. And, we could talk about the weather, but we don't have to because I'm sure most of you already know the answer to that. The difference, though, is it's more luxurious in a quality of life way. I don't have to accumulate a lot of things to feel like I've made it or to feel comfortable or to feel like I've achieved things in my life. It's about something much quieter and more like understanding that, your job is what you do, is fund your lifestyle, and that's it. It's not the center of your life and it's not the center of who you are. Something that some people might call a British quirk, that I might even have called a British quirk at one point or another, but it's more of a choice that the society here in the UK has made collectively about what life is actually worth living for. And when you've lived in the United States your whole life, that choice feels a bit radical, but I have to say I'm getting used to it. Some people ask me if I'm settled here in the UK. I mean, I've been here 3.5 years. It's about time, right? I do. I do feel settled, but not in the same way that I was really originally groomed to understand what the word meant. The United States gives you this version that settled is something about visible and a completed task list, more external, things you can point to, things you can use as evidence tangibly. You have a retirement plan, you have the right neighborhood, your lawn is perfectly manicured, blah, blah, blah. But the version of settled that I have now living in the UK is much more internal. It's much more in line with who I am. Nobody else can see it really. And I'm sure from the outside, I probably look like more of a mess than anything. But that is also because of a lot of personal things that this move has unveiled that I need to deal with. But the UK versus the US doesn't necessarily have the same physical evidence to support that I have settled. But I do know 100% for the first time in my adult life that those 3 decisions that I mentioned, where I live, who I'm with, and what I do, I made them consciously, deliberately, on purpose, in midlife crisis, if you want to call it that was not going to really wait for me to be ready. I just had to figure it out. Lots of people ask me if I miss living in the United States. And I always say things like I miss parts of it, because I do. I miss the landscape. I miss the warmth and optimism of the American people. I do miss the way Americans tend to believe that something great is always just around the corner, but I don't miss the version of me that was comfortable in a way that felt like I was numb to the world. I definitely prefer this more active, albeit a little bit more exhausting, but at least more fulfilling life that I have here in the UK. There's really no conclusion except that that's where I am at this moment, 3.5 years in. This is an ongoing journey. It's probably always going to be a bit unsettling or a bit back and forth because, until I guess if I am lucky enough to live 40 plus years here in the UK, recalibration doesn't really happen, just because you unpack some boxes. But the kid has a British accent and I've started to not really notice when she switches between the American accent and the British accent. I am opening my taste buds up to a much wider variety of food and food that actually tastes like the way it's supposed to, rather than a bunch of chemicals. And I'm enjoying the walkable towns and cities, the accessible public transit, and a new version of beautiful landscapes that I didn't even know really existed. So I guess the question really is what your environment asks you, whether it's really serving you as the person, as the unique individual you are, or it's a checklist that you need to make sure that you complete at a certain stage of your life in order to feel settled. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's why I felt the need to completely uproot my life and move abroad in my 40s, was that I had completed the checklist, but I still felt like incomplete in some way. So maybe the point is to just always be in that flux where you're constantly questioning something and you're in a place where you can speak to that question as honestly as possible. And you have options for that question to be answered a lot more fluently than the American Dream checklist.